In the summer of 2007, the most ambitious monster truck tour of all time was created from the ground up and is still positively remembered today. It featured nearly all of the biggest name independent monster trucks of the time competing on large, creative tracks at major NASCAR superspeedways. The tour received nearly unanimous praise from fans and drivers alike, giving an illusion that this was the future of monster trucks. Within 15 months, however, the tour, along with the hopes of a major racing-based monster truck championship, were upended. This is the story of the Major League of Monster Trucks.
This is the Mlmt.
A lot of the videos, photos, results, and information in this video came from the Monster blog. Please consider visiting their website or YouTube channel for nearly 2 decades worth of high-quality monster truck coverage. Links are in the description. Rich Schaefer grew up in motorsports. His dad competed in tractor pulls and eventually became part of the crew at pulling events held by TNT Motorsports. TNT Motorsports was also one of the premier monster truck tours of its day, featuring large, open qualifying monster truck events. Once he was old enough, Rich landed a job with TNT Motorsports, which was bought out by Pace Motorsports shortly thereafter. The Pace events were operated by the United States Hot Rod Association, who went on to sanction Monster Jam events. Rich stayed with the organization as ownership transferred to Pace, working mostly with the Red Man pulling series. After a few years, he decided to move home and got a job working in the offices for Bigfoot. By the late 1990s, Rich began promoting his own events. He branded his events as the Monster Truck Challenge, an homage to the series of the same name that ran under the TNT Motorsports banner a decade prior. Schaefer's events were mostly at speedways on the eastern half of the US. The Monster Truck Challenge was well respected and featured top talent, including Gravedigger and Bigfoot. Schaefer had bigger goals in mind though, wanting to create a nationally touring major monster truck racing series, something he wouldn't be able to accomplish on his own. In the late 1990s, a California businessman named Joe Froome attended a disappointing monster truck show. He knew he could produce a better show, so he talked to the venue and was invited to promote the event the following year. This event was in Red Bluff, California, and Froome continued to produce the event annually, dubbed the West Coast Monster Truck Nationals. Eventually, Froome went on the road with his production to other West Coast cities, like Redmond, Oregon, and Merced, California. Froome even went international, touring at a handful of arenas in Mexico. He named his tour NorCal Monster Trucks, which was later changed to the Major League of Monster Trucks. At the time, his events were top tier, with many early Mlmt events featuring Monster Jam trucks like Gravedigger, Monster Mutt, and Maximum Destruction. Within a few years, the Red Bluff Stop on Tour became one of the biggest independent monster truck events in the US, featuring up to 13 trucks over a 3-show weekend. These events were impressive, but Joe Froome too had his sights set on a bigger goal. In 2007, Schaefer and Froome got together to make their dream a reality. Together, they were going to make a monster truck tour with a legitimate racing point series that could rival Monster Jam in size. Froome's Major League of Monster Trucks naming and branding was chosen for the venture. Creating a production of this scale was no easy task, so the workload was divided amongst a small group of executives. Froome took on the role as president, while Schaefer took on the role of VP of operations. Medusa, whose real name is Deborah Miceli, took on the role of VP of driver relations just 2 years after winning the Monster Jam World Racing Championship. Along with them was a VP of television and licensing, legal counsel, and contracted marketing specialists. Froome and Schaefer may have had the know-how when it came to producing monster truck events, but they certainly didn't have the money for something of this scale. To financially support the tour, Froome found investment from Benny Brown. Brown was the owner of Corning Ford, a car dealership in Corning, California, and the founder of Broken Bow Records, a major country music label which artists like Jason Aldean were signed to. Brown created a new company, Pro MTR LLC, to operate the Mlmt under. With sponsorship from Corning Ford and Broken Bow Records, the tour was financially set. Since the money for the tour was coming from Brown's businesses, Benny Brown and his associates had some say in the Mlmt's operations. To mutually promote both the Mlmt and Broken Bow Records, artists signed to Broken Bow were scheduled to perform during the pit party. It was intentioned that this would make the event a sort of country festival and drive up ticket sales in the process. The 2007 Major League of Monster Trucks Tour began in mid-May in Merced, California, at a venue Froome had promoted events at in the past. This was a fairly standard show for the old-style Mlmt, and not a major stop the tour became known for. Not much is known about this event, as little media exists online for it, but Dave Harkey, Carl Van Horn, and David Smith took wins throughout the weekend. In the summer of 2007, a major Speedway Tour schedule was released and lineups were announced. It was instantly clear that this was going to be a landmark in the world of monster trucks. Most of the venues were major speedways, and the trucks competing were top tier, with a combination of fast racers like Dan Runte and Mark Hall, plus no-holds-barred freestylers like Jim Kohler and Carl Van Horn. The Mlmt was sure to go down in history. To make the tour more interesting, a Racing Points championship was at stake, with the season victor being crowned for the biggest championship in the world, at the final stop of the 2007 tour in Nashville, Tennessee. First for the newly upgraded and rebranded Mlmt was the back-to-school bash held at Lowe's Motor Speedway outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. This was already an annual event produced by Rich Schaefer's Monster Truck Challenge that had a reputation within the monster truck community for being an impressive event dating back to the 90s. With their debut, it was immediately clear the Mlmt was not messing around. Metal truss beams and banners littering Lowe's Motor Speedway with the Mlmt branding and a massive racing and freestyle course showed that the Major League of Monster Trucks was serious business. At the time, the Monster Blog referred to this show as a new era for the sport, and it was pretty clear why. This was the 12-truck lineup that did battle in Charlotte. Mark Hall, driving Raminator, laid down the fastest pass in qualifying. Round 1 saw the biggest upset of the night as Carl Van Horn, one of the slowest qualifiers, defeated Dan Runte, although Runte returned as fast loser. The first semifinal race saw Dan Runte narrowly knock off Don Cretin, followed by Mark Hall defeating Carl Van Horn. This set up a classic Bigfoot vs. Raminator final round, but first, a long jump competition was held over the center bus stack. The format was similar to the high jump competition at Monster Jam World Finals, where the drivers have to start at a specified point and accelerate as fast as possible to a ramp. With a fresh ramp, Don Cretin went first and laid down a strong distance of 70 feet. Cretin's jump was only beaten by Mike Hawkins, who soared 74 feet through the air to a victory. Now it was time for the final round of racing. Both trucks left the line evenly and stayed together until the third jump when Mark Hall bobbled. It was close at the end, but Mark Hall was narrowly given the win. The racing finalists went first in freestyle, but it was Chris Bergeron who raised the bar early on for the remaining drivers. Towards the end, Carl Van Horn took a lead with a ragged edge freestyle ending with this spectacular move. Jim Kohler followed and laid down a strong performance, but not enough to take the lead. In the end, Carl Van Horn joined Mike Hawkins and Mark Hall as winners in Charlotte. The inaugural event for the Mlmt was clearly a success, and hype was building up for the remainder of the tour. The following weekend, the Mlmt visited Texas Motor Speedway in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for a two-show weekend featuring another 12-truck lineup. This time, racing was on a tricky Z-shaped track, and other large obstacles were on the track for freestyle. The biggest headline was from the Bigfoot camp, who brought two trucks to race. Like in Charlotte, Bigfoot 14 was driven by Dan Runte, but the other was driven by Medusa, former Monster Jam driver and acting vice president for the Mlmt, who had joined Team Bigfoot the year prior. Qualifying for the first night brought smooth, strong runs from nearly every truck. The semi-final round saw Carl Van Horn narrowly lose to Dan Runte, and David Smith easily defeat Andy Hoffman. Both trucks were fast in the final round. David Smith bobbled in the second leg of the race course, and this allowed Dan Runte to cruise to his first Mlmt victory, after coming so close the previous weekend. In freestyle, Mopar Magic and Medusa set the bar high early on with a barrage of big hits. Later on, David Smith and Jim Kohler raised the bar even more, with a pair of high-energy freestyles. In the end, however, it would be Carl Van Horn taking another freestyle victory, after impressing the judges with another ragged edge freestyle. For the second night at Texas Motor Speedway, the ramps at the finish line were steepened. Qualifying saw a lot of trucks make mistakes, in sharp contrast to the consistent competition the night before. The racing bracket was dominated by Team Bigfoot and Flame Motorsports. In the semifinals, David Smith made easy work of Medusa, and Dan Runte narrowly edged out a victory over Darren Basil. Smith and Runte were undeniably the fastest trucks throughout the weekend, and both drivers made nearly perfect passes in their second final round matchup of the weekend. In the end though, David Smith made it across the finish line first. Freestyle started out with a bang as Mopar Magic suffered a hard crash when the rear wheels clipped a bus obstacle. Even after Mopar Magic, the trucks were having a hard time navigating the bus stacks without nosing over, but this made freestyle all the more interesting. Carl Van Horn had a streak going, but his run wasn't enough to get another win. Jim Kohler took the freestyle win after ripping the whole rear axle out from under the truck on a hard landing off the bus stack. Competition was fierce on the MLMT. In the first 2 weekends, there had been 6 different winners in 7 competitions. Every driver was a threat to win, and that's something that made the MLMT a step above other monster truck tours. After a few-week hiatus, the next stop for the MLMT Tour was at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Originally scheduled to be at the drag strip, the event was moved to the dirt track, and rumor was leaked the race course would feature an over-under ramp. Over-under racing, also known as Monster Cross, had been run before, but with a bridge connecting the launch and landing ramps. The Las Vegas MLMT track didn't have a bridge though, meaning the trucks had to clear the gap. The lineup featured 12 trucks in total, some of which were based on the West Coast and not at the previous 2 MLMT stops. In qualifying, even the fastest trucks were running nearly 1-minute times, showing just how long this race course was. Some trucks had issues clearing the over-under jump, but David Smith didn't and entered the racing bracket as the fastest qualifier. The biggest upset of the night, and the whole season for that matter, came in round 1 when rookie Andrew Peckham knocked out Dan Runte. Runte was able to return in round 2 as a fast loser and had to face fast qualifier David Smith, who he defeated by a surprising margin. Round 2 also saw a pair of saves from Andrew Peckham and Carl Van Horn each. This set up a semifinal round of John Zimmer versus Dan Runte and Dan Patrick versus Darren Basil. Both semi-final races were close, although Runte and Patrick picked up wins. The final round wasn't as close, as Runte cruised past Patrick for the win. With a container and a massive bus stack on the track, freestyle was bound to be good. Early on, Darren Basil laid down a strong freestyle, and so did Dan Runte later on. In the end though, neither were a match for Carl Van Horn, who easily won freestyle by getting the 2 biggest jumps of the season to that point. Las Vegas proved to be the best MLMT event of the season thus far, and the frontrunners in racing and freestyle were becoming obvious. Dan Runte had made it to all 4 final rounds so far, winning 2 of them. This gave him the lead in the MLMT Points Championship over second place David Smith. Freestyle wasn't a factor in the Points Championship, but Carl Van Horn had won 3 out of 4 freestyle competitions thus far, showing he was the man to beat. After a 1-week break, the MLMT arrived in Red Bluff, California for Froome's West Coast Monster Truck Nationals, the first leg of a non-stop month-long series that would start out west and end in Tennessee. This was the lineup for the Red Bluff event, a strenuous 3-event weekend. On Friday night, current points leader Dan Runte missed the final round for the first time all season, with the win going to Craig Christensen. Jimmy Cretin was able to fight against tough competition and emerge victorious in freestyle. For the Saturday show, Craig Christensen took another racing championship, defeating David Smith in the finals. Competition results for the remainder of the weekend are unknown. Craig Christensen won the MLMT West Coast Nationals racing title, a racing points championship running only throughout the Red Bluff weekend. For the season-long MLMT Points Championship, David Smith was able to make ground on Dan Runte, but Runte managed to hold on to his lead. Next for the MLMT was a stop at Kentucky Speedway near Sparta, Kentucky, one of the biggest shows of the season. This event featured the biggest lineup of the season to this point, with 16 trucks competing against each other. The massive Z-shaped racing course required the drivers to navigate a long straightaway with 3 obstacles, including a bus stack, then make a sharp right turn, take another jump, make a sharp left turn, and fly over the finish. After 2 rounds of qualifying, David Smith clocked in the fastest time, pitting him against the slowest qualifier in round 1. But the slowest qualifier was Mark Hall, who never made a qualifying pass due to mechanical issues. Both drivers were consistent throughout the race, but Mark Hall narrowly managed an upset, putting a hurt on David Smith's chance at a points championship. The first semifinal race saw Mark Hall take on Scott Hartsock. Both drivers made nearly perfect passes, but Mark Hall was able to barely edge out another win. In the other semifinal race, Darren Basil made easy work of Dan Runte. This set up Mark Hall and Darren Basil in the final round. Up to this point, Darren Basil had marched through the bracket with relative ease, while Mark Hall's wins were mostly photo finishes. Basil was the favorite to win, but coming out of the final turn, Mark Hall put his foot to the floor and squeezed out the win in the best race of the season to that point. Freestyle saw a barrage of great runs. Andy Hoffman spun the fastest donuts of the season so far, Medusa almost endoed her truck over the bus stack, and the Kohler brothers both flipped their trucks over. Towards the end, Mike Hawkins took the lead with a high-energy freestyle packed with big air. To close out the competition, Dan Runte, David Smith, and Doug Nolke performed an unscored tandem freestyle, giving Mike Hawkins his second win of the MLMT season. The following weekend, the MLMT had a 2-show weekend at the drag strip within Memphis Motorsports Park with this lineup. Racing was on a long, 3-obstacle straight-line drag course, which allowed the trucks to pick up a lot of speed. On the first night, the tight confines and high speeds proved to be tricky, especially for Sean Duhan, who suffered one of the worst crashes of the season after losing control of the truck and barreling over a cement wall. Immediately afterwards, David Smith picked up a win over Round 1 fast loser Dan Rente, a vital win for Smith's hope at a Points Series championship. The finals came down to Dan Patrick versus David Smith, where Dan Patrick was able to squeeze out his first MLMT win. The tight confines of the drag strip limited what the drivers could do in freestyle relative to the massive tracks at other MLMT stops. A few van stacks were brought onto the track, but other than that, the drivers only had the racing obstacles to work with. At the end of the night, Dan Rente walked away with his first freestyle win of the season. On the second night, the tricky track bit again, taking Andy Hoffman out of competition in qualifying. Rente and Smith matched up again in round 2, with Smith taking another win and the best race of the weekend. In the semifinals, Jim Kohler knocked out David Smith, and Medusa spun out, giving a win to Dan Patrick. Jim Kohler was the fastest qualifier, but Dan Patrick won the previous night, so this was seemingly an even matchup in the final round. In the end, it was Jim Kohler taking his first racing win of the MLMT season. Kohler immediately followed this up with a win in freestyle, being the first driver to sweep a major MLMT show. While David Smith had a strong showing in Memphis, it still wasn't quite enough to overtake Dan Rente in the season point standings. The next weekend was the season championship, and it was going to be close between Smith and Rente, as every other competitor had been mathematically eliminated. If Smith wanted to win the biggest championship in the world, he had to advance one round farther than Rente in the season finale at Nashville Superspeedway, a task easier said than done. The morning before the season finale, a press conference to discuss the 2008 MLMT Tour was held. Froome, Schaefer, Medusa, and other MLMT executives made announcements and took questions from the monster truck teams. The MLMT made it clear that they aimed to be a true racing series in 2008, breaking away from the status quo in the monster truck industry.
2008, all our events are open qualifying. 16 truck paid fields, open qualifying. As you can see, it's $100,000 per event. As you can see, it breaks down good money all the way down. One bonus that's on there is a triple up bonus. And what that bonus entails is if you win racing, win freestyle, and you also run low ET during the event outside of qualifying, it's a $2,500 bonus. If nobody wins that bonus the first event, it rolls to the next event. It becomes $5,000. It rolls until somebody wins it. Let's talk about freestyle. It's based on 16 trucks. By the time we get done racing, if there's only 10 trucks left of freestyle, the amount of purse that would have been 11 through 16 gets put back into the top 10. So the purse becomes that much more for those people. At the end of the year, there's a $100,000 points fund broken up for $50,000 for racing, $50,000 for freestyle. Anybody that ran for us this year gets one provisional. Our provisionals are a little different though. If you don't make the field and you decide to use your provisional to try to get to our points championships or win money, the person who you bumped out of the field still receives their first round money. Your provisional will not pay you any points or any money till you advance to the second round.
Because you see what we're doing with the tracks. We're going to have a target range of about 1,800 to 2,000 feet on average for our track links. This one out here is around 1,800. Vegas was 14. 10 a.m. Friday morning, we'll start with tech inspection. We are going to beef it up, guys. We're going to have a rule book, and we're going to start enforcing rules. We're going to be checking fuel. We're going to be checking blower overdrive. We're going to be checking weight. This is a real sport, and rules will be enforced or you do not run. Not legal, you go home, or you fix it on spot.
The points will go with the driver, but a driver just can't bail out on a team in the middle of the season. Okay? But we're not going to say you can't have 3D trucks. We're welcome to run what you have.
You're welcome to run what you have. We're going to discourage you.
With such massive ambitions come high costs. Even with big sponsorships, the MLMT needed a lot of eyes on its events to be financially successful.
We're going to have 15 to 18 events, all at major motor speedways, very similar to Nashville, Kentucky, Texas, Vegas, so forth and so on. And at most of these speedways, we're going to be running at the big track, opposed to even the dirt tracks or drag strips like we did in Memphis last week.
From a programming standpoint, the networks that we're talking to, we can be assured that we're going to get a great time slot. We'll definitely be able to produce some very good ratings, higher than what the Live Nation stuff is doing. And they're very excited about from the corporate sponsorship aspect. The fact that we've got some Fortune 500 companies very interested in your product right now.
By giving such a massive opportunity to monster truck teams, the MLMT expected its competitors to display the utmost professionalism and respect for its brand.
When it says 11 a.m. Thursday night, It's 11 a.m. Thursday night. If you're the number one points person and you show up Friday morning at 7 a.m., you won't be competing that weekend.
The official MLMT decals will be for your trucks, your transporters, and you are not allowed to have any competing promo, On your uniforms, it must not have any competing promoter logos, and we will provide the patches for you.
While the MLMT was obviously competing with Monster Jam, this press conference showed that the MLMT was also aiming to compete with NASCAR and other forms of professional motorsport racing. The MLMT wanted to take monster trucks to the next level, one that broke away from the stereotypical redneck extravaganza and instead showed the technological marvel of the monster trucks, along with the professionalism and driving expertise of its competitors. The 2008 MLMT was an exciting prospect, but the 2007 season had to wrap up first. Championship weekend was held at Nashville Superspeedway, a likely venue given the connection the MLMT had to country music through its investors. An awesome over-under course was constructed that these 19 trucks had their go at. Each truck got one pass in each lane for qualifying, which was more important than usual since only the top 16 trucks would be seeded into the racing bracket. Mark Hall qualified number 1, while Dan Rente and John Zimmer rounded out the top 3. David Smith, looking for a come-from-behind victory in the points series, qualified a measly 8th fastest, giving Rente an even greater lead over Smith before the racing bracket even began. Things didn't get any better for Smith in round 1, as he fell victim to Dan Patrick and was eliminated from the season points series, despite making the tightest possible final turn. With that, no matter what happened in the remainder of the bracket, Dan Rente would be crowned the 2007 MLMT Series champion. But the night was far from over, as each driver was still vying for the final wins of the season. Possibly the most iconic moment of the season occurred later in round 1, when Andy Hoffman fell far behind in his race and jumped directly over Dan Rente. The best race of round 2, and possibly the best race of the season, was Dan Rente versus Doug Nolte. Both were some of the best racers in the industry at the time, and ran clean passes. Similar to what Mark Hall did earlier in the season in Sparta, Doug Nolte swung out of the final turn and used his momentum from the outside lane to power to a come-from-behind upset victory. The semifinals matched Mark Hall against Mike Hawkins, and John Zimmer against Doug Nolte. Both Mark Hall and Mike Hawkins bobbled in their race, but Mark Hall was still able to fly to an easy victory and advance to the finals. The other race was much closer. In the final turn, Zimmer nearly cut off Doug Nolte, but Nolte was able to power to another come-from-behind victory and put himself in the final round for the first time all season. The season finale final round was set, Doug Nolte and Tailgater versus Mark Hall and Raminator. Doug Nolte competed in 3 other MLMT events in 2007, but had not had much success at any event. To get to the finals in Nashville, he made come-from-behind victories in the outside lane in round 2 and the semifinals. Mark Hall competed in 2 MLMT events in 2007 and had gone undefeated at each. He too used the outside lane momentum swing strategy, so lane choice was a big deal in this race. Mark Hall got the outside lane, which compounded with his success earlier in the season and his fast qualifier position, made him the clear favorite to win. On the first lap, Mark Hall bobbled while going under the crossover jump, giving Nolte a big lead heading into the second leg of the course. Mark Hall had come from behind earlier this season, but he was way behind this time. As both drivers rounded the final turn, Mark Hall was able to put the ram power to the ground and cruise to a win in the season finale. Making Mark Hall undefeated throughout the 2007 MLMT season. Billy Chapin started out freestyle with a bang, getting a massive hit off the bus stack and a bumper-dragging slap wheelie. Devin Jones followed next and was the first one to hit the box van, barely making it over. With multiple box van to crossover combinations, it appeared both Ricky Only and Steve Sims were on their way to taking the lead, but the judges ultimately determined Billy Chapin's run was better. In a controversial call, Andy Hoffman tied for the lead, despite not hitting any of the bigger obstacles. It looked like Medusa was going to take the lead too, but Chapin and Hoffman held off another fierce competitor. Jim Kohler came out next and impressed with sky wheelies over the box van and landing ramp, but crashed after only 4 hits. Still though, he was able to blast into the lead. Carl Van Horn, possibly the fiercest freestyle competitor all season long, followed, but broke early into his run. Bergeron and Moore made big hits too, while David Smith's night got even worse after smashing a barrier on his first hit. Mike Hawkins and Darren Basil each laid down great passes, putting themselves in 2nd and 3rd place respectively. John Zimmer was off to a great start, but crashed early and fell short in scoring. Since freestyle was running an ascending order of qualifying finish, the 2 fastest trucks in racing all season closed out freestyle. Rente and Hall laid down solid freestyles, but neither were impressive enough to knock off Jim Kohler, making him the season finale freestyle champion. After the Points Series season finale in Nashville, the 2007 MLMT Tour made 2 more stops in Oregon, specifically at indoor venues in Klamath Falls and Redmond. This was the lineup of trucks and the winners in Klamath Falls. These events had smaller lineups and weren't for points, similar to the season opener in Merced, California. So the debut season of the upgraded MLMT was clearly a success, right? On the surface level, absolutely. Tickets sold well, venues wanted the tour back for 2008, and fans and drivers alike enjoyed the competitive and groundbreaking aspects of the MLMT. From inside the organization, however, issues were forming. The MLMT had financial problems. A lot of money was invested into just getting the MLMT off the ground for its initial season. Promotional banners and tents, transportation, venue rental fees, event promotion and advertising, dirt and crush cars, equipment rentals, monster truck booking costs, a marketing firm, legal counsel, along with the salaries and wages of all of the track crew and executives within the organization added up. As a lot of new businesses do, the MLMT bled money in 2007, but the investors were okay with losing money now to make money later. But that didn't stop the MLMT from breaking up. In December 2007, the MLMT split off into 2 directions. Joe Froome and Rich Schaefer had disagreements over decisions that were being made throughout the 2007 season. There were similar disagreements between Froome and the investors, ultimately leading to Joe Froome departing the Pro MTR organization, taking Medusa along with the MLMT name and branding with him. While the investors were done with Froome's MLMT, they weren't done with the idea of a major monster truck racing series. They asked Rich Schaefer if he could create a monster truck racing league similar to the MLMT with the potential for growth, and he said yes. This is pure speculation, but I imagine money was a key issue in the disagreements between Froome, Schaefer, and the investors. As seen in the press conference, Froome was looking to greatly expand the MLMT in 2008. Between the $100,000 event payout, $100,000 event year-end payout, television production, staffing, legal counsel, external marketing team, massive track layouts, and everything else needed to produce an event at the largest speedways in the US, the 2008 MLMT season would have likely had to make high 6-figure, if not over $1 million at each event just to break even. Remember, this was all after the 2007 season already lost money. And all of this was sitting atop an unproven business model. No one had ever done anything like this. A major monster truck series that focused on racing instead of freestyle had not been done since freestyle took over the industry a few years prior. The last major attempt at this was the Pro MT sanctioned Truxpo events, which ultimately failed in the early 2000s. The Monsters of Destruction Tour was also a racing-based series, but was much smaller in scale than the MLMT, making them hard to compare. For these reasons, it's hard to confidently say the MLMT could have been successful at such a large scale. Froome had an awesome idea going with an open qualifying, performance-based payout racing league, but I personally doubt it could have made enough money, at least early on, for the investors to be satisfied. So the MLMT broke into 2 separate parts, one owned by Froome, which kept the MLMT branding, and another produced by Rich Schaefer and funded by Benny Brown's Pro MTR organization. They were now competitors in the monster truck industry, so let's see where they each ended up. The Major League of Monster Trucks, led by Froome and Medusa, announced an updated 2008 tour schedule on January 1st. The previously announced 18-stop tour shrunk to a 13-stop tour, but still planned to visit some of the largest speedways in the US. Shortly afterwards, more information regarding cash payouts at each event was released. As the months went on, some 2008 MLMT events were silently being rescheduled or canceled well before the season began, a worrying sign of things to come. With about a month to go before the season opener, the MLMT began to announce partial lineups. At this point, these 23 trucks had signed up for the season opener in Memphis, Tennessee, and these 29 trucks had registered for Atlanta, Georgia. These lineups are really interesting, as some smaller name trucks, like Big Crunch, signed up to compete on the biggest monster truck tour of all time. One of the most interesting announcements about the 2008 MLMT season was the introduction of a numbering system to all the trucks. The Monsters of Destruction did something similar for their 2006 season. An example of how to mix the number and the personality of the truck was given. Versus TV won the MLMT television rights and was scheduled to produce a quote non-scripted reality show based on the 9 tour stops that remained at this point. Versus TV was in 74 million households at the time and gave the MLMT a 4 to 5 p.m. time slot. With only 3 weeks until the season was scheduled to begin, the first 2 events of the season were postponed to the summer. With this, questions about the MLMT began to rise. The MLMT doesn't have a major sponsor, so where's the money coming from? If the schedule is continually changing, how can you expect monster truck teams to commit to the tour? The MLMT just started last year. Is it growing too fast? Will they be able to sell enough tickets? How was the TV deal reached? The monster truck rumor mill quickly began to answer these questions, and anger was mounting against Froome. For more on this, I suggest you read Kyle Doyle's well-written open letter to the MLMT, linked in the description. The given reason for the 2 postponements was to prepare to shoot for television, with Froome noting that there wasn't enough time between the TV deal signing and the first event to produce a quality television product. More press releases were made in the following weeks, clarifying the 2008 point structure and announcing an added stop in Indianapolis, Indiana, making it sound like everything in the MLMT was A-OK. But it wasn't. A few weeks later, the event at Texas Motor Speedway was postponed, while the event at Nashville Super Speedway was outright canceled. And a month later, the entire 2008 season was postponed. Well, not quite. Froome still produced the West Coast Monster Truck Nationals event in Red Bluff that October, but that was the only stop for the much-anticipated 2008 MLMT Tour. So why was the tour canceled? Money. The MLMT was never able to secure a major sponsor for the 2008 season, and couldn't fund its ambitions without finding outside financial backing. With the recession in full swing, 2008 was a tough time to start a business, and there's no doubt that played a factor in why the MLMT failed. So the 2008 season was postponed. Did a 2009 season happen? Nope. Plans were made, but Froome once again stuck solely to the Red Bluff event, never reviving the once great Major League of Monster Trucks. So Froome and Medusa didn't have any success with the 2008 MLMT season. But what did Rich Schaefer and the Pro MTR do? As mentioned before, the investors behind the Pro MTR decided to fund another Speedway Monster Truck Tour, produced by Rich Schaefer this time. Schaefer convinced the investors to use the Monster Truck Challenge name he had used at his events for many years prior, although the logo was updated and given a sleeker look. By this point, the 2008 Monster Truck Challenge season was already underway, with an indoor event in Beaumont, Texas taking place in March. Throughout the first quarter of 2008, a schedule and lineups were announced, and it was obvious that Schaefer's plans were much more realistic, and more likely to make money, than Froome's ideas. Many of the stops on the 2008 Monster Truck Challenge series were at mid-sized speedways, with 8 to 10 truck invitation-only lineups, and no crazy payouts. Similar to the MLMT, a season-long Racing Point series was tallied, with the series winner being crowned at the season finale. The 2008 Monster Truck Challenge summer season got off to a whirring start, as the season opener in Paducah, Kentucky was abruptly canceled. Monster Jam had an event in the area at the same time, and Schaefer canceled his event at Live Nation's request, so not to split the potential customer base. After that speed bump, the Monster Truck Challenge season got underway, with its first stop outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota, a 2-show weekend. Racing was a tricky Z-shaped course, while freestyle had plenty of big obstacles and carnage. All in all, the events were a success, and Jimmy Cretin swept all 4 competitions throughout the weekend. About a month later, the Monster Truck Challenge invaded the Orange County Speedway in Middletown, New York for a Wednesday-Thursday show. Jimmy Cretin dominated in the 3-jump straight-line racing course. A limousine was brought on the track to crush for freestyle, where many of the trucks broke early. In the end, Jimmy Cretin would once again put on a dominating performance. 2 days later, the Monster Truck Challenge stopped at Myrtle Beach Speedway in South Carolina. A Chicago-style course with vermed turns was used for racing, while a bus stack and multiple RVs were on the track for freestyle. Jimmy Cretin defeated Dan Patrick in the racing finals, which Cretin followed up with a freestyle win, making him undefeated in the 2008 Monster Truck Challenge series. It was obvious that the Monster Truck Challenge events weren't as ambitious as the MLMT, but they were still possibly the best independent monster truck events of the year. A few weeks later, the flagship event of the 2008 Monster Truck Challenge series took place outside of St. Louis, Missouri at Golden Gate Speedway. Racing took place on a wild figure-8 course that forced drivers to navigate dirt, asphalt, and grass surfaces. In his hometown show, Dan Rente ran the fastest time in qualifying. In round 2, Jimmy Cretin was defeated for the first time all season by Mike Hawkins, who would go on to lose to Dan Runte in the semifinals. There was a lot of breakage throughout the night, which allowed Troy Rose to advance to the finals against Runte. In the end, Runte was able to take an easy racing victory at the biggest Monster Truck Challenge event of the year. During intermission, Jack Willman Sr., Jim Kramer, and Fred Schaefer were honored in what was dubbed the Monster Truck Challenge Hall of Fame. Closing out the night in freestyle, Andy Hoffman put up a controversial perfect 30-point score early on after only making 3 small hits and a cyclone. Other drivers put on good performances, but Andy Hoffman's 30 was impossible to beat. Mike Hawkins was the first driver to hit the massive cement mixer obstacle, and did so twice, coming up 1 point short with the 29. Lastly, Jimmy Cretin hit the track. With 3 cement mixer hits and a barrage of slap wheelies, Jimmy Cretin also scored a perfect 30 and easily beat Andy Hoffman in a cheer-off for the freestyle win. The 2008 Monster Truck Challenge series appeared to be going well, but behind the scenes, issues were forming once again. There were disagreements between Schaefer and one of the investors about the Monster Truck Challenge marketing team. Schaefer's marketing team was let go, and a new marketing team was brought in to promote the remainder of the events. To make matters worse, the Lincoln, Nebraska stop scheduled in 2 weeks was abruptly canceled due to low ticket sales. Next on the Monster Truck Challenge schedule was Eldora Speedway in Rossburg, Ohio. Racing took place on a standard Chicago-style course, with Jimmy Cretin defeating Carl Van Horn in the finals. In freestyle, Carl Van Horn, who had one of the biggest leaps of the season, tied with Jimmy Cretin for the win. The following weekend, the Monster Truck Challenge made its annual return to Lowe's Motor Speedway outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Mike Hawkins dominated the racing bracket in freestyle, while Jim Kohler won the wheelie contest. Behind the scenes, the Monster Truck Challenge's issues were getting worse. Tickets weren't selling well for the remaining events, and even though the Monster Truck Challenge was losing less money than the Mlmt the previous year, the investors still weren't happy. It was 2008 and the US was in a recession. Remember, the Monster Truck Challenge investors were also financially invested in the auto industry through Corning Ford. The recession impacted both the auto industry and the entertainment industry, and the investors couldn't afford multiple businesses that were doing poorly. So they pulled the plug, and the remaining events on the Monster Truck Challenge 2008 schedule were canceled, except the event the following weekend in Nashville, Tennessee. When the Monster Truck Challenge crew arrived at Nashville Superspeedway, they learned only 1,000 advance tickets had been sold, way below what they needed to turn a profit. The Nashville racing track was fairly simple, especially compared to the previous year, basically being a version of St. Louis style racing where both drivers turn left. In qualifying, Mark Hall defended his fast qualifier position from the year prior. In round 2, Hall faced serious competition as Carl Van Horn was inches away from knocking him out early on. In the semifinals, Hall easily knocked out Hawkins, who spun out. The other semifinals race between Steve Sims and Jim Kohler was much closer, with both drivers spinning out in the final turn. Sims would narrowly take the win and advance to the finals. Sims and Hall had raced in Nashville the year before, although it was the 1 versus 16 seed race in round 1. The fact that Sims had made it all the way to the final round in 2008 showed just how much he had improved over the past year. The drivers remained even on the first leg of the track, until Mark Hall bobbled about halfway through the course. This gave Sims a massive lead, and once he navigated the final turn, it was obvious who the winner was. That being said, Hall mashed the gas and flew over the finish line. But it was too little too late. Steve Sims took his first win with the Monster Truck Challenge. In freestyle, Sims was able to take the lead after making multiple nice hits off the van and bus stacks, plus getting a save early in his run. Immediately afterwards, great runs were laid down by Jim Kohler, Carl Van Horn, and Mike Hawkins, but Sims was able to hold on to the lead and sweep the competition in Nashville. And well, that was it. In the following weeks, the Monster Truck Challenge website was changed to show no relation to the Pro MTR. Without the money from a major investor or sponsor, a nationwide Monster Truck Challenge tour couldn't go on. This wasn't quite the end of the Monster Truck Challenge, though. Rich Schaefer kept the rights to the Monster Truck Challenge name, and the new logo was never trademarked. This meant Schaefer was free to continue promoting events under the same name and branding. In 2009, sponsors were found for 2 Monster Truck Challenge events. Thompson Metal sponsored an event at Bristol Motor Speedway, while Circle K sponsored the Back to School Bash event at Charlotte Motor Speedway. This wasn't a tour so much as 2 completely separate events. The Bristol, Tennessee event was first, and was held on the asphalt surface of the last great Coliseum. Unfortunately, racing was rained out, but the drivers went all out for freestyle and made it a good show. The Charlotte event followed a few weeks later and featured the now iconic Charlotte crossover jump for the first time. Mike Hawkins swept the event again, with a narrow victory in the racing finals and an iconic save in freestyle. Schaefer continued promoting these 2 events for the next few years, even bringing Gravedigger back to the Monster Truck Challenge in 2011, but Schaefer's involvement in monster trucks was coming to an end. Brian Manson was part of the track crew for the Monster Truck Challenge. In 2008, he created MTX Event Productions LLC, and a year later began hosting arena events under the Monster Nation name. 3 years later, Manson also began producing the Toughest Monster Truck Tour and Monsters on the Beach. All of these events were top-notch, and Rich Schaefer took notice. In 2013, Schaefer handed over the Charlotte and Bristol events to Manson. Schaefer had been working with the NHRA for a few years at this point, and I think he was ready to move on from monster trucks. Under Manson's leadership, the Bristol event continued annually until 2019. and the Charlotte event still takes place today. Known for being the premier independent monster truck event, the Back to School Bash is one of the final remnants of the MLMT and Monster Truck Challenge series. Looking back, it's easy to see why the MLMT is remembered so fondly. Massive independent events, especially with long race courses, just aren't that common anymore. The MLMT showed the monster truck industry at its best, and it's no wonder why people long for something similar to return. Since the MLMT, there's only been a single attempt at a monster truck open qualifying event to my knowledge, and calling it that is a stretch. The 2015 No Limits Monster Truck World Championship had an invited list of competing trucks, but the promoter technically opened it up for any other team to show up and race. I don't believe there was money on the line, and no one else showed up. As much as I would love to see an open qualifying, cash purse, legitimate monster truck racing series, I think it's unlikely to ever happen, as a lot has changed to the industry since 2007. Like it or not, monster trucks in 2023 are more about the highly skilled tricks, daring maneuvers, and clever 3D bodies more so than head-to-head racing. Also, promoters increasingly prefer to produce smaller shows at local venues rather than major shows at large venues. Small shows are much easier, as they're less of a financial risk and require a much smaller staff to run. To some extent, I think this creates a cycle where racing isn't prioritized. When monster trucks perform at small venues, they usually don't have the required space for a long and creative racing course. Promoters see that their fans prefer the competition elements other than racing and stick to the small venues. If a super speedway racing-based tour like the MLMT were to pop up in 2023, it would have to constantly keep its racing courses innovative and daring so it didn't lose its creative edge and fans in the process. One thing that made the 2007 MLMT tour stand out is that it really had all of the top independent names competing on one tour. I think this would be much more difficult in 2023, as some big name teams have started their own tours, and other teams are closely attached to one or two tours. For example, Jimmy Creighton may not want to abandon his own tour for another tour he would be in direct competition with. Similarly, Jamie Gardner may not want to leave Monster Jam, as they provide most of the bookings for the team. Trying to break these ties would be met with a lot of resistance, and I don't see it being easy to get all the top independents to compete on one tour once again. And on top of this, someone is going to have to fund this tour, which would take millions of dollars. In the modern monster truck industry, a large, open qualifying style event is an unproven business model, making it a risky investment. For this reason, and the fact that there's so much competition out there, I think it would be hard to find money for a tour like this. Unfortunately, I think it's extremely unlikely something like the planned 2008 MLMT series will ever happen, never mind be successful. The MLMT will go down in history as one of the greatest monster truck tours of all time, as it was by far the highest level of independent monster truck competition that's taken place this century. And had it not been created during a worldwide economic recession, the MLMT may have succeeded. The story of the MLMT is one of how money makes the world go around. They had the support from venues, fans, and drivers alike, never mind the expertise in event production and organization, but without financial backing, it never stood a chance. For now, something like the Outlaw Monster Truck Drag seems to be a much more realistic vision for a monster truck racing-based series. But who knows? The XFL returned from the grave after 19 years, so maybe the same could happen to the MLMT. For now, all we can do is look back on what could have been, and hope the story isn't over.